and I forgot. So we just
Awesome.
started recording. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. So we'll work our way through the workshop agenda. I'm Sue Bobolkaya, and I'm the Land Conservation Manager at the Department of Conservation and Recreation. And we have our agency experts here with us today to go over our different categories of grant funding for the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation. And first, I'll go over some general information with you all. For this grant round, we have $5.5 million from the budget of state funding available. And as you can see, 25% of that appropriation goes to the Virginia Outdoors Foundation. And that leaves us with the funding breakdown you see here for the 5 categories. We have a little extra money in the natural area protection category due to a prior grant that was withdrawn last year. And that gets rolled back into the same category from where it was originally granted. Eligible applicants for VLCF are state and local governmental entities and qualified nonprofit organizations. And those definitions are set out in the Conservation Easement Act for qualified nonprofit holder organizations as holders. Applicants can seek up to 50% of a project's acquisition costs unless they're a state agency, and then they can seek up to 100%. And that is set out in the Code of Virginia. The code the budget requires that at least half of the funding go to projects that provide public access. And the code requires a geographic distribution for a fair allocation throughout the state. So we try to disperse the funding throughout the state. And the costs that applicants can apply for are acquisition costs only. We don't pay for infrastructure. Oh, okay. Not sure what just happened to my screen. Wow, slideshow. Okay. I'm not sure what you guys are seeing now because my slideshow just went to regular slides. Resume slideshow. There we go. Okay. When you apply for a grant, the project that you're submitting must protect a specific site. The parcels have to be clearly delineated in an aerial photo or on a map. And if you have the parcel numbers from the locality, that's awesome. That'll help us identify it even more clearly. And an approximate acreage should also be included with your application. The projects have to be completed within 2 years. If it takes a little longer, we can extend the grant for 1 extra year for a total of 3 years. And all projects have to have a public body partner, and that's a governmental entity. That's a requirement in the code as well. So nonprofits have to have an open space easement held by a public body on their project or held or co-held with them. Our grant manual and the application haven't really changed from our last grant round. We've just made a few updates. We've got some new folks on board, and so we've got their new contact information in the grant manual. We've updated that. Please note that in Appendix A, we have the application requirements, sort of a checklist of all of the items that we need to see in your application. Appendix B has the score sheets for each of the categories, and it would be really helpful for you to score your application yourself, and based on the information that you include in your application. So that's because that's what we're going to do, and that might help you see if you've left anything out of your application to let us know. Appendix D has required property protections that VLCF requires in order to get funding. Those include riparian buffer protections, agricultural conservation plan, and forest management plans. So you want to take a look at that and make sure that that matches up well with your projects. And the one thing, there's two things actually that are new with this grant manual. We need for you to submit your application electronically for this round. We're going to try this out and hope that it works to go paper-free. You'll be emailing your application to Larry Mickelson. His email is on this slide. It's on our website. It's in the grant manual. It's in the grant application. The only problem with this is if your file is larger than 20 megabytes, you've got to get in touch with Larry the week before so he can send you instructions on how to upload your file to our state's large file transfer platform. So you don't want to wait till the to the last minute for that, because that's another new step. And we don't want to run into any issues or glitches with that, because applications are due by 4 p.m. on April 5th, and we cannot accept them after 4 p.m. We do offer to help you go over your application if you can get it to us to at least a good week, 2 weeks before April 5th. We'll go over that with you, although that date is coming up pretty quickly. Once we get all the applications in, we will compile them and send them out to our interagency task force. And those are the folks that are on the call today, as well as we've also have the Virginia Outdoors Foundation on our interagency task force. Each of those experts will score their category, which is up to 100 points per category. We recommend that you choose a secondary category that your project might fit in, because sometimes the funding may roll over in one category and it could pick up some folks that chose a secondary category. And it's very important that you remember to address all of the additional scoring criteria, which I'll be going over in just a couple slides here, because those have a maximum of 72 points, and those could really make or break funding for your project. Again, here we're just saying use the scoring sheets, score your application, make sure everything we need is included in your written application. We note here in red that you will be held to everything you promise in your application. So if you promise 100-foot forested riparian buffers and you get points for that, that's what's going to be required at the end in your conservation easement, open space easement, or deed of dedication when your project comes to a close and you get your funding. So now onto the additional scoring criteria. There are 9 additional scoring criteria for a maximum of the 72 points, and these apply to each application. First of those 9 is the Virginia Outdoors Plan Identified Need. You get a few points here if your project is identified in the Virginia Outdoors Plan or in the locality's comprehensive plan where your project is located. Crystal's going to go into the Virginia Outdoors Plan a little bit with her presentation for open space and parks. So I'm going to quickly go through this one. But we've got the website here, and this is what it looks like. Next, you can get a few points if your project is in a very high or moderate need locality. in the Virginia Recreation Access Model. And this can be found in Virginia's Natural Heritage Database Explorer. A few of these maps are in this Data Explorer. And to get here, you go to the website, and you do not have to be a member to access. Through that, type the address of your project in that top toolbar, search bar, and it zooms in to your project. And then on the left, you can see the drop-down menu for conservation planning, and you click on the Recreation Access Model, and the drop-down menu there gives you the key for the aquatic and the terrestrial. And this is site specific. Next, we take a look at the project's benefits for water quality. And here, depending on if your project will provide wider than 35-foot vegetated riparian buffers, if you do 50 feet or 100 feet, you get more points. If you provide a forested buffer, you get more points. So here it's important to clarify what exactly you plan for your site to get the maximum points. And this can, you can find the topo maps on the Virginia Natural Heritage Database Explorer just by going to the switch base map like we've shown here. And you zoom into your project by typing the address in the search box. Protection of cultural resources was a new criterion this past year, and this really was meant to be an open-ended question here for people to highlight if there's cultural resources on their property that haven't necessarily been recognized, but that are important locally, historically, culturally. And we've got some examples listed here, but it's not limited to that. And we want you to document the resources that you have, provide photos, tell us about the importance of the site. And if you're going to be providing educational opportunities for the public, then you can also get some more points there. Number 5 here, we've got the Conserve Virginia values listed. Each of the categories also awards points for Conserve Virginia. This slide shows you the address for the Natural Heritage Database Explorer again, and you can see in the drop-down menu that 7 different categories are listed for Conserve Virginia. In order to use this, the basic understanding here is that you type in the address in the top toolbar, zoom into your site, click on Conserve Virginia, and all of the layers will pop up as green. If you unclick that green box, you can then click on each of the 7 layers separately, and the different colors will populate those layers. So hopefully that's helpful. You get points in your categories, but if you have more than that 1 layer of Conserve Virginia and you agree to protect those resources, excuse me, you can get a couple extra points here as well. And if you have any questions on Conserve Virginia, please feel free to contact Gina. She works with us. She's a big part of the Office of Land Conservation at DCR, and she is helping out with Conserve Virginia too. So you've got her contact information here, and she can also be, actually, we'll make sure that she's listed on our webpage as well. And next we have the wildlife value points. Becky, did you want to say a couple of words here to explain this criteria?
Yeah, I'm happy to
Thanks.
do that. To talk about this. One of the things that I will offer is that, as Sue mentioned, that particular category is that particular scoring element is 10 points out of those extra 72 that Sue mentioned are available in the additional scoring criteria. And it was a little discouraging to see in many of the applications that came in at the end of last year that few of them made any specific references to wildlife. And so this is really a tremendous opportunity for you to create the compelling case that your particular acquisition project really is beneficial to wildlife and wildlife-related recreation in Virginia. So even if you just tell us that there's wildlife on your site or on your project area, you can get a point. If you can help connect your project to conserving species of greatest conservation need, which are identified in Virginia's Wildlife Action Plan, or state or federally listed threatened or endangered species, and the habitats that support them, you can see here on the screen, you get a lot of extra points for your proposal. And some of you, but not all, could make reference and connections to the opportunities that your proposed acquisition has to providing opportunities for visitors to view wildlife, or you're providing access for recreational fishing, maybe even recreational hunting. Again, there's a lot here that you should be able to take advantage of to really add to the overall points in your proposal. And the link here on the website to the website is how you can get started. But please feel free to call me, and I'm happy to walk through it with you or review what you've come up with from the results of your own search work and help you integrate that into your proposal. I'm happy to do that at any point. Thanks, Sue.
Sure. Thank you, Becky. Okay, and then finally here on this slide, you can see the last three categories to get some extra points here in the additional scoring criteria. If your project provides for public access, you can get some points here. And then we use this VIMS Social Vulnerability Index to see whether your project benefits underserved communities. And here's the website for that. And again, you can just click on the locality address search to type in an address. And this has the drop-down menus on the right-hand side, but that's where you can click to see the Social Vulnerability Index score to see how your project ranks and the points that you would get. We are not locked into using the VIMS model. We chose this model because of all of the inputs that we thought it represented what we were looking for, but we're open to other models. Just make sure that you provide those in your application and provide the links and your scores, and so we can check out the different models that you're proposing to use as well. And then finally, you get points for the ratio of match to total cost. If you provide more than 60% match, you get a couple points, and if you provide more than 80% of the cost of your project, you get more points. You would have to also provide a preliminary appraisal to get those points. Just to clarify, there's some requirements to get those points. But that's all included in our grant manual, those details. And here, you've got the website for VLCF, and that's where you can find the manual in our application. You've got my contact info and Larry's contact info. We are happy to talk you through any questions you may have, and look forward to getting your applications. Next, I will hand over.
Real fast, Sue, before you
Yes.
switch over, we had one question about your presentation that came in the chat.
Okay.
Someone wondering about riparian buffers and if they are permitted to have any openings for footbridges or public access to a stream.
Yes, they are. And that's all laid out in the appendix. Was that Appendix D, I think, that talks about the requirements. There are exceptions in there for buffers to have access to the water. Thanks, good question.
Awesome. That's all that I saw come up in the chat. I can go ahead and make Jen a presenter now.
Thank you so much, Gina.
There we go.
Okay. Okay, hold on. Let's see.
It takes a little while to get it. Yeah, no worries. Perfect.
Okay. Okay, great. So good afternoon. I'm Jen Perkins, and I am with the Virginia Department of Agriculture, and I will be walking through the farmland criteria. Something a little bit different this year, or this grant round from, if you've seen this presentation before in past grant rounds, is that because of the amount of funding we have this year, farmlands and forestry will be separate categories. Sometimes they're combined together, but they'll be split into their own. And so there's a little bit of extra funding for both of those categories. So in the farmland criteria, there's a total of 100 points available, broken down into 3 different categories. The first is land evaluation, and the second is land use, both with a maximum of 40 points each, and then conserve Virginia for an additional 20 points. So in land evaluation, soils is the criteria with the highest point category with a maximum of 25 points, and points will be awarded for prime and unique soils and soils of statewide importance. In order to figure out the percentage of the property that contains these soil classes, you can use the USDA's online web soil survey tool. And it's really critical to note that if you do not include the percentages and or acres of the soil classes that are prime, unique, or statewide importance, we will consider them there to be none on the property, and you will end up with 0 points for that category. So the next criteria is the average size of the farm for a maximum of 15 points. And here points will be awarded on a sliding scale based on how much larger or smaller the project property is relative to the average size of farms within the project locality. And you can get this information from the latest US Census of Agriculture, which is from 2017. You can see here, it's table 8, and where it's highlighted, it's broken down county by county what the average farm size is. And I personally find the Ag Census to be really confusing and hard to find tables sometimes. So if you have any difficulty finding this particular chart, please let me know and I will email you the link to it. Okay, so for land use, there are 4 criteria. The first is the current and historical use of the property, with 4 points being awarded for land that's currently being farmed and 4 points being awarded for a century farm. Most landowners know and are very proud of having a century farm designation, but in the event that for some reason you don't know, we have a complete list on the VDAC's website of the century farms broken down by locality. I'll also note here that the century farm designation is a pretty straightforward process to get, and I'm the one who actually processes the applications. So if you have a property that would qualify, feel free to get a century farm application together, because it can help, bolster your VLCF application. The criteria is that the farm has to be in the family for 100 years or more, that it must either be farmed or lived on by a direct descendant of the original owner, and it must gross $2,500 or more of in farm products annually. We do not require you to provide title or your financials. We simply ask that you get the application notarized to attest to the accuracy of the information. So hopefully it's not too much of a lift for most people. So I recommend doing that if you have the opportunity. Okay, so proximity to other preserved lands. There are 10 points here, a maximum for adjacency, and then the point amounts decrease as the distance increases. And again, you can see here the Virginia Natural Heritage Data Explorer, which is going to be your best friend in this process, regardless of what category you use. You can use that to identify your project location and then what other conserved lands are in the area. Okay, vulnerability ranking with a possibility of 8 points. So this is also in the Natural Heritage Data Explorer. You can use the Conservation Vision Development Vulnerability layer to determine this information. That layer ranks the property's threat from development from a class 5, which is the highest, down to 1, which is the lowest. So you can get a maximum of 8 points for the highest threat of development, and then down to 0 if there's no threat to the property. Okay, best management practices. We do provide points for both voluntary BMPs as well as those that have been implemented through state or federal programs. The highest awards will go to those properties that have formal conservation or nutrient management plans. And then the final criteria in land use is whether the conservation of the property is supported by local land use policies, with up to 4 points being awarded with demonstrated support through the comp plan, ag zoning, ag and forestal districts, or land use taxation. So, and then the Conserve Virginia layer, Sue touched on this, but you get those 20 points if 50% or more of the property intersects with the agricultural layer, and then 10 points if 50% or fewer intersects with it, in addition to those the intersection with the additional points that you get that Sue mentioned in the previous additional criteria. So that is the quick overview. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions. I'm happy to help to the extent that I can. My contact information is here, and unfortunately I'm going to have to jump off of this, but if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and either we can answer them now, or maybe Gina can, if there are additional that come in, maybe grab them and share them with me later, and I can get back to you. And that is all I have.
Thank you so much, Jen. Up next is Carl, and while we're getting him situated here, I forgot to mention that also with this grant round, we're asking for applicants to submit a screenshot of Conserve Virginia when you're pulling your application together, because Conserve Virginia is going to be updated in the next month or so, which would be when these are due. So we want to make sure you get the points if you're in, and it might change and you're out. We don't want that to happen. So just provide a screenshot when you go to Conserve Virginia and see if your project is in. Thanks.
Hi all. Is anybody seeing my screen right now? It doesn't look like it. Maybe hold on a second. So I want that.
Not yet.
We did for a moment, and then it left us.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, you just got to get into your, there you go.
How's that? You're not seeing my speaker notes, are you?
Nope.
Good. Thanks everybody for participating today. I'm going to talk today about the forest preservation category. A quick note on myself. I am the new Forest Land Conservation Program Manager for the Department of Forestry. So being new, I myself am learning about the VLCF process. So it is very possible that if you have a question, I won't know the answer, but I can rely on my colleagues here on the call, or I promise I will track down the answer for you if we don't know as a whole. So feel free to reach out. My contact information is at the end of the presentation. So for projects in the forest preservation category, in general, we're looking for projects of high conservation value that are well connected to existing conservation lands or conserved lands, and expand on them if possible, and projects where the property is likely to be well managed for forest resources. Very specifically, proposed projects in this category are scored based on 8 criteria shown here, each given a certain amount of points or weight that add up to 100 points in total. I'll go through each criteria in turn, and I'll use an example application to give you a sense how the math or calculations work for each criteria. It's really pretty simple. So my example application is a 500-acre property. 450 acres of that property are forested. 400 acres of that property are called high conservation value, forest conservation value forests, and I'll talk about that in a moment. 63% of the acreage is in conserved Virginia. 6,250 feet are in watercourses. It is adjacent to a wildlife management area and within 2 miles of another property in easement. The application has a forest stewardship management plan attached to it, and it can demonstrate that that forest stewardship management plan is being implemented. All these things are important in our scoring. And the applicant is willing to permanently retain 375 acres of the forest within their property. So the first criteria gives more points to projects that encompass larger tracts of land. Overall property size, of course, is an important factor for successful forest conservation projects. Larger blocks of forest land under a single ownership tend to be much more easy to manage and have greater ecological benefits. In terms of scoring, projects receive 1/2 point for every 50 acres of forest for a maximum possible score of 10. Any project over 1,000 acres wouldn't get any more than the maximum. So for example property, it has 500 acres of forest divided by 50, which is 10 times 0.5, 1/2 point for every 50 acres. That's 5 points. The second criteria gives points to projects where the proposed property is more forested or has a higher proportion of forest on the property. Obviously, from the perspective of this category, a larger percentage of forest is a better investment for us. So this has a maximum possible score of 20. It's simply the percent of the property that is forested times 20. There is an important note here that came up recently. To get a scored for this criteria, the project must meet the definition of real estate devoted to forestal land use. And you can read all about that at the website that's on the screen called the SLEEK standards, the State Land Advisory Council standards. But the really critical one here is if the project or the property has a minimum of 20 or less than 20 acres of forest on it, it doesn't qualify under this definition as real estate devoted to forestal land use. So it will receive, no matter what the percentage of forest on the property, it'll get a 0. So an example property score is, for this particular example project, there's 450 acres of the 500 are in forest. That's a percentage times 20, 18 points in total. For the third criteria, projects receive more points if they capture high conservation value forest as defined by the Department of Forestry's map. The map you see here is DOF's map of high conservation value forests. You can see this map on the Natural Heritage Data Explorer under the Conservation Planning tab. The FCV score that is based on a number of other factors. You can read about that in the manual. I'm not going to go through those now, but there are 6 additional factors involved in the scoring of the FCV value. So if you want to know more about that, you can read about it on the VLCF website, or you can contact me and I can talk you through all of those factors that affect this model. The maximum possible score here is 15. It's the percentage of the property that has either a very high or outstanding value on our model times 15. And you can kind of explore again how much of your property is in the outstanding and very high categories on the Natural Heritage Data Explorer. So our example property, 400 of the 450 acres of the property are outstanding or very high times 15, so it gets a very good score for this. The 4th criteria gives points to projects that provide considerable benefits to maintaining or improving water quality and controlling flooding. So for every half point, for every 500 feet of watercourse on the property, you get 1/2 point. The maximum possible score being 15. So if you have 15,000 feet of watercourses on your property, on the proposed property, you'll get a maximum score. So on this particular property, you can see how that calculation works. The 5th score is adjacency. The adjacency criteria gives more points to projects that are adjacent or close to already conserved land. There's a maximum possible score here of 5, broken down by these distance categories. So if you're adjacent to an already conserved land, you get 5 points. If you're within 5 miles, you get 1 point, and greater than 5 miles, no points. And in that particular example, it's right adjacent to conserved land, so they have 5 points. The 6th criteria is management. This criteria assigns points to projects where the landowner manages the property according to a forest stewardship management plan or some equivalent of that plan that was prepared by a professional. And it adds additional points if the project is actually following those recommendations in their forest management plan to achieve their forest management goals. So it has maximum score of 5. If there's a current plan that's being implemented, they're actually following it, then it's 5 points. If no plan exists, or if the plan exists and there's no implementation yet, it's 3 points. If there's no plan, no points. Did I skip one? No. The 7th criteria assigns points to projects where the landowner is willing to preserve a large proportion of their property in forests, and that can be working or managed forests, of course. So it is the percentage of the forest land base on the property that will be retained as forest times 10, with a maximum score of 10. So in the particular example case, the project said that they would retain 375 acres of forest of the 450 acres of forest on the property. So it's that proportion times 10 for a score of 8.3. And finally, the 8th criteria gives points to a project that within Conserve Virginia, there's a maximum possible score of 20. Greater than 50% of the forested acreage within the forested acreage gives you 20 points. 1 to 49% within the forested acreage of Conserve Virginia gets 10 points. No acreage is 0 points. In this particular example, they had greater than 50% of the forested acreage in Conserve Virginia, and that gave the project 20 points. So you can see for the example project, how those points added up to about 81 out of 100. This project obviously scored pretty well. Just some final suggestions. This is a highly competitive category. We've had many projects in this category before, so it's really important to fill out your application fully, to respond to all the criteria and the questions. We certainly suggest that you run the scoring sheet yourself and provide a description in your application of why you got that score and why it should receive a high score in that category. We certainly will consider that information when making your scoring. Our information isn't always perfect, so we do consider other sources of information. And do, like we've mentioned, pay attention to the secondary category designation. In some cases, we've seen projects submitted to the forestry category actually get picked up, or at least considered in other categories, if not picked up in the forestry category. Thanks. I think that's about that. There's my contact information, and any questions you can send to me via email.
Thank you, Carl.
Yep.
Next up, we have Carrie Richardson from Department of Historic Resources. And looks like you are becoming the new presenter. Let's see. Takes a couple of seconds for this stuff to kick in. Did you see? I guess you click on that bottom share screen and then click on your PowerPoint. And it should come up. Is it not coming right away?
It's not. Let's see. Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties.
Okay.
First,
Trust me, I understand.
the share button is grayed out. I can't press it.
If you click on your PowerPoint and then click on the share, I think it was the order that I had to do it. Carl, you just did it. How did that work?
Even though the screen button is gray, I was able to click on it. Ooh,
There you go.
something's happening.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay. Well, as Sue said, my name is Carrie Richardson, and I am the Easement Program Specialist for the Virginia Department of Historic Resources. And in addition to reviewing VLCF grants, I also review and present all of the new easement applications here at the department. So we'll jump right in. In the historic area preservation category, we have 7 different criterion. The first is the historic significance category, and there are 35 points available in this category, by far the largest number of points in any of our categories. Criterion 1 establishes the type of historic or cultural resources to be protected, including architecturally significant buildings or structures, archaeological sites, historic landscapes, or a Virginia battlefield. Strong proposals are those that are likely to protect and preserve a resource that is listed on the Virginia Landmarks Register, or the VLR, or is a Civil War, American Revolutionary War, or War of 1812 battlefield or site, or is formally determined eligible for listing on the VLR, and retains a high degree of historic integrity and relates to Virginia's culturally diverse history, and is included on the Conserve Virginia Cultural and Historic Preservation category. I should add that those two categories together total over half of our eligible points. So please try to focus on those categories. Taking a deeper dive into Criterion 1, historic significance, we award 25 points if a historic resource or property is individually listed on the Virginia Landmarks Register, or if the historic resource or property is a contributing resource to a historic district listed on the Virginia Landmarks Register. And if you are unsure if your property is listed individually or a contributing resource, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to look that up for you. Or you can also access our registers page on DHR's website. If your property is not listed on the VLR as an individual resource or as a contributing resource, but you feel that it's eligible to be on the Virginia Landmarks Register, we can award 10 points in this instance. Eligibility for listing is determined by DHR's in-house process for evaluation and listing on the Virginia Landmarks Register. And official listing on the Virginia Landmarks Register will be required for properties awarded funding under this section. Again, if you are unsure if your property has previously been reviewed by the Department of Historic Resources and may have been determined eligible, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to look it up. Just shoot me an email with your address and your parcel number, and that will make things a lot easier. And also under Criterion 1 for historic significance, if your property is not listed on the VLR, but it is on a Civil War, Revolutionary War, or War of 1812 Virginia battlefield or site, we will award 25 points. The evaluation of battlefields is that if a battlefield or site must be identified with a priority rating in one of the following reports administered by the National Park Service's American Battlefield Protection Program. And those are the 1993 report on the nation's Civil War battlefields and the 2007 report to Congress on the historic preservation of the Revolutionary War and War of 1812 sites in the United States. Those reports include maps of all the core and study areas of each battlefield, as well as priority ratings for all of the battlefields. And again, if you do not have access to these reports, maps, or priority ratings, please feel free to reach out to me and I will happily look up your property and let you know. And the last part of the Criterion 1 historic significance is, of course, other. And this is a change from the last grant round, I should add, this first point. We will be awarding 5 points to resources that are underdocumented or relate to Virginia's culturally diverse history. And that can include properties associated with the Reconstruction era, Civil Rights Movement, African American, Native American, Asian American, Latino, LGBTQ, and or women's history. And we also award 5 points if the property includes resources with a high degree of historic integrity. Our second criterion is threat, and the maximum score here is 15 points. This includes properties that are currently on the market for sale, in an estate being settled, threatened by development, or in imminent danger of demolition. Properties that are recently on the market for sale, vacant, unoccupied, or significantly deteriorated and in need of immediate preservation will receive 10 points. The 15 points for the first set of properties. And we will award 5 points if a property is adjacent to a similar property currently on the market or is for sale or sold within the previous calendar year. We will award no points if there is no documentation of a threat. And here I should add that in the last few grant rounds, we have received a number of applications claiming threats to the property, but providing no documentation of those threats. And if we do not receive that documentation, we really cannot award those points. So please send us the real estate listings if the property is for sale. If there's a legal battle going on over an estate or something like that, send us the legal documents. And if the property is about ready to fall in, send us a lot of pictures of its condition. That will help us a lot in determining the threat here and awarding you points. And criterion number 3 is the use and treatment of historic resources and the property. This includes plans for future uses of the property, and if they're appropriate and consistent with the historic resource stewardship and protection, we will award 5 points. And you are also eligible to earn up to another 5 points if the plans for the treatment, alteration, and maintenance of the historic resources on the property are appropriate and consistent with historic resource stewardship and protection. We will not award any points if there are no documentation of plans for the use of the property or the treatment of historic resources. And just a note here, if you have any related reports and plans for the property, please submit them with the application. These could include an assessment report, a archaeological survey report, anything like that that will help us understand how you are stewarding the property and what your future plans for the property may be. And I should also note that all proposals and project plans must be consistent with the Secretary of the Interior's standards for the treatment of historic properties. And we are happy to provide those standards to you if you do not already have them. Criterion number 4 is historic resource protection, and here the maximum score is 10 points. We will award 10 points if the proposed easement terms and restrictions provide comprehensive protection for historic resources and are specifically consistent with the Virginia Board of Historic Resources easement template. And likewise, we'll award 5 points if those easement terms and protections for historic resources are acceptable, but just generally consistent with the easement template. And here we are really looking to find out if the applicants have had access to our easement template and understand the easement template and the protections that it offers. And hopefully an understanding of those terms and protections will help you enhance your use of the property and your VLCF application. So again, if you do not have a copy of any of our easement templates, please let me know. Please just tell me what type of property you are applying for, if it's a battlefield or an architectural or archaeological property, and I will send the appropriate template. Criterion 5 is adjacency to conserved lands. The maximum score here is 5 points. And like the other categories, you will receive 5 points if your property is adjacent to existing or conserved lands, as in this example. If it is in the viewshed or in close physical proximity to significant historic resources and or existing conserved lands, you will receive 3 points. But if it's not in the viewshed of or in close proximity to significant historic resources and or existing conserved land, but represents a unique cultural resource within a geographical area, we will award 1 point. And criterion 6, furthering public interest. Here is a maximum score of 5 points. If the project includes specific plans for programs that promote research, education, community outreach, or heritage tourism, it is eligible for 5 points. And again, we particularly encourage applications that conserve resources associated with underrepresented communities and provide public educational opportunities to share untold stories and advance social equity. Excuse me. And excuse me, I'm sorry. We will award 3 points if the project includes general plans for programs to be developed that would promote research, education, community outreach, or heritage tourism, and no points if there are no specific plans to further public interest. And finally, criterion 7, conserve Virginia. Again, a maximum score of 20 points. Is the property included within the cultural and historic preservation layer in Conserve Virginia, which is the red layer? And that we will award 20 points if the property is, if 50 to 100% property is within this layer, and 10 points if less than 50% of the property is within the layer. And we have some additional requirements for the historic area preservation category. We ask that you submit high quality photographs or digital images, including exterior of the primary historic buildings and structures and any secondary buildings and structures, and architecturally significant interior spaces and features, and the setting and view shed of the primary resource. Please remember that we most likely have not set foot on this property, so it's important that we have a good understanding of the property and its resources and its setting. So in my opinion, you can't have too many photographs, so please make sure you include those. For archaeological sites, we require a general view or site plan and images documenting the condition of the site. And we understand that photographing archaeological sites can sometimes be challenging because, for instance, if it's an earthwork in a forest covered with leaves, the photograph is not really going to tell us much, but we do appreciate having that photograph. And we also ask that you take an aerial map or perhaps a survey and put a big red X where those archaeological resources are located, because that will help us too. And for battlefields, we request photographs of the overall site, its setting and view shed, and all historic and non-historic structures, roads, and other features within the battlefield or site. And here we are trying to establish if the general feeling of a battlefield is still there. We understand that there's modern intrusions and such things, but if we can get a sense of the overall landscape, that will help us a great deal. And finally, for projects awarded grant funds in the historic preservation category, the property owner shall offer to convey a perpetual historic preservation easement on the property to the Virginia Board of Historic Resources. The VBHR decides whether to accept this easement offer based on established criteria and policies governing the easement program. The property must meet easement program eligibility requirements, or DHR may recommend an alternative easement holder. And listing on the Virginia Landmarks Register may be required if your property is not already listed on the VLR. And finally, properties are required to be open for public access for a minimum of 2 days per calendar year. And this does not mean 48 hours straight. It just means 2 visits per year, perhaps an open house for Garden Week or a class coming to visit and understand more about a battlefield. So it doesn't have to be anything so strict, but we do require 2 days per year. And finally, the image on the screen is the easement application for DHR, which we do require after you have received your grant approval. And I've also included my name and contact information, as well as my colleague, Megan Melanat, who is the Director of Preservation Incentives, as well as a few websites that may help you determine your eligibility for some of these categories. If you have any questions, again, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. That's what I'm here for. Thank you.
You got one question during your presentation that came in the chat. Someone wondering if a battlefield, building, or archaeological site is required for this category.
A battlefield building?
A battlefield, comma, building, or archaeological site?
Not necessarily. As long as you are within the recognized battlefield core and or study areas of a battlefield, then it doesn't matter if there's no archaeological sites or buildings on the property. And in most cases, or I shouldn't say in most cases, but in some cases, you know, when we come and visit the property and do a site visit, we often find earthworks or other archaeological sites related to the battle. So.
But she's asking, I'm sorry, I think she's asking, in order to apply in the historic category, do you have to be a battlefield or a building or an archaeological site? Do you, like, what other historic sites are eligible to apply? Perhaps
again, as long as you're listed, if your property is listed in the Virginia Landmarks Register, that could be archaeology, that could be a cultural landscape, that could be a historic landscape, that could be a building. So I think the best way is to find out if you're listed and or eligible for listing.
Okay, thank you.
Anything else?
Right. Thank you. I think that's it for now. And next, Rob Evans, I think, is going to be presenting the natural area category. So we'll go from the historic to the natural.
Okay. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
All right. Like Carrie, I'm waiting for approval. There it is, maybe. Could you all let me know if it shares?
There it is. You start the slideshow.
Okay, if I can figure out how to do that, we'll do it.
Awesome.
All right, thank you all for the chance to speak with you today. I represent DCR's Natural Heritage Program, and we're a part of the NatureServe network nationally and internationally, and we do things by different data standards that we can talk about through time. But today we'll mainly just talk about the VLCF eligibility requirements for the natural area category. So, and these are all in the manual and in other places, but I'll just draw your attention to the idea that the project you're proposing must support natural heritage resources. And in a few moments, I'll tell you or remind you what those actually are. And you will have to demonstrate the necessary commitment and financial capability to adequately manage the property. And again, we'll talk about all these in a little bit further detail. And your application will need to include a recommendation from the Natural Heritage Program related to this code section that the project is actually eligible and qualifies to become a natural area preserve. And if it's successful, all of the area that you've proposed will have to be dedicated as a natural area preserve, and there's some very specific requirements that you'll have to follow with that. So to have a natural heritage resource, there's a lot of different opportunities, so to speak, to have those. A natural heritage resource could include a so-called natural community, a rare plant, an animal, a significant cave, or a stream conservation unit. And I've given you the approximate numbers there of the numbers of those different types of features in the state that you could run into. So that number means that there's about 709 different plant species that you could encounter that could qualify as a heritage resource. And so here's the different examples. The natural communities are intact representations of vegetation, everything from the coast to the western part of the state. Plants, everyone knows what those are. Animals actually includes insects. Caves, I'm not showing you a cave here, but there are critters inside caves that we're seeking to protect. And if that pops up, there's a stream, and the highest quality streams in the state we refer to as stream conservation units. So all of these things you can find more information about on our website, and they're all represented within the Natural Heritage Data Explorer that Sue has been pointing you to earlier. The management emphasis. The site has got to be protectable and manageable, and the owner has to have the financial commitment to be able to pull that off. I'm showing here an example of a site that needs prescribed fire. We're not implying that every site in Virginia needs fire or that you would have a crew available to do it, but if your site is appropriate, that is what you would have to have. So we'll work with you to evaluate what, and we call these stresses. What are the things that might stress the heritage resources both right now and in the long term? And then try to figure out what the management practices are that will abate those threats. And it's entirely possible that a site could be considered that is essentially unmanageable or unprotectable from those stresses. You could have something, let's just say, for example, on the absolute shoreline, and we know that the sea is rising so incredibly fast that there's literally nothing you can do to stop it from overwashing the thing you're trying to protect. Hopefully those kinds of sites are few and far between. Others could take high intensity management, like this fire example here, where perhaps it needs to be burned every 3 years to keep those heritage resources around. And other sites may be a little bit more in between, where just there's a few invasive species around on the property that need to be controlled. But we'll work with the landowners to understand and explain what those are. But in general, the landowner needs to provide the commitment and show the capability to address those threats. We may be able to help, but we can't automatically commit to being able to provide all the resources there. So to get the DCR recommendation for a project, these are the factors that the code section addresses and that we would be considering. So again, it's emphasizing the presence of the heritage resources, and I underline the word significant contribution. So, you know, there's many examples for many different types of heritage resources in the state. So how significant is the project that you would be proposing? Is it the last of its kind, the only of its kind, the best of its kind, that sort of thing? And our plan emphasizes what we call essential conservation sites. And you can find those in the Heritage Data Explorer. Those are basically the very best representations of all of the combined heritage resources in the state based on their known qualities. And we'll also emphasize the least or unprotected elements. There are some things in the state that have had zero protection to date. And if a project brings forth one of those, that might get special priority. We'll also consider the rarity of the element. How many examples are known in Virginia? How many examples are known in the world? And essentially the rarer your example is, the higher priority it would be, especially if something is globally rare. We'll consider the size and viability of your site, as we already talked about. And that lends itself toward the capability to be able to protect that site from the threats. So every project, if it's funded, requires a deed of dedication. This is a permanent deed restriction or set of deed restrictions. And I'll remind everybody that that means this is in perpetuity. Once this gets recorded, it's not just you as the current landowner or us. This will carry on to future generations. So we have to be very cautious that what we're proposing can actually hopefully be achieved. There'll be no impairment clauses. So we will not allow activities on that property that would impair the heritage resources, negatively disturb them, or in otherwise be inconsistent with the protection of those resources or their management. So if there were factors on that property, the example I gave before, that needs prescribed burning, if the landowner is vehemently opposed to fire on their property for whatever reason, that would be obviously a deal breaker. The deed will restrict incompatible uses, and I can refer you to this technical document that's online. If you can't find it, we can have people send it out later, but if you Google those terms there, the Natural Area Preserve Management and Guidelines Technical Report, that lists very clearly things that are incompatible, such as horses, other things like that will not be allowed on a preserve. But we will allow compatible uses, and again, that document goes through what those are. Interpretation of nature, low intensity trails, things like that can be allowed. And all of this must be spelled out in a signed management plan. So before the grant is dispersed and funding is provided from VLCF, and before the tract is actually dedicated as a nature preserve, we will have to work with the landowner to go through all these factors. What would you like to do on the property? What needs to happen to perpetuate the heritage resources? And that all has to be written up in a management plan that is referenced in the deed of dedication, and that has to be signed by both DCR and the landowner before the deed of dedication can be applied and before the funds can transfer. Like every other category in the grant manual, there are the specific scoring criteria are listed in there. So I'll just draw your attention to those in the back. I'll just summarize them briefly here, but biodiversity significance obviously could bring you the most available points. And I won't go through all the nuts and bolts back in there. We can discuss them if you'd like, but basically we'll be asking and determining the quality, quantity, and the significance of the resources that you have that are present. We'll be looking at ecological integrity. So we'll be looking at the landscape that your project's in, what the parcel itself supports, and whether or not your project has any connectivity. So that'll be what lands, if any, adjoin the specific parcel and project, and what the biodiversity management intent of those lands is. I've already talked several times about the likelihood of success. It needs to be very clear that both the Department of Conservation and the applicant understand what management activities are needed. And it has to be very clear that that applicant can undertake those activities without DCR's help, whether that's mechanically treating weeds or using herbicides to kill the invasive species or conduct that prescribed fire. All those things need to be well understood, and the applicant must show the capacity to accomplish those. And the best way to do that is to arrange a site visit with the appropriate staff folks, and there will be more points awarded if that takes place, but I'll suggest you really can't develop a good application unless you do that. And not only would that be a site visit that could help you understand what the heritage resources are, if any, on the property, we can identify those for you, help people interpret those, talk about the management issues, and also then discuss with the actual landowner what it means to be a natural area preserve. And that means in some cases we get projects proposed by, I'll call them agents, on behalf of somebody else, but the points are awarded here to talk to the landowner directly with the staff. So that needs to be able to happen. And pretty straightforwardly, Conserve Virginia will just evaluate what percentage of the actual project is included in just the one category of Conserve Virginia called the Natural Habitat and Biological Diversity category. I'll just reiterate that it's super important to have the site visit and landowner contact. There are points awarded for that. If we conduct a site visit alone, that would be 3 points. And if we have a discussion with the landowner alone without the site visit, that's 2 points. So there's only 5 points that come from this. But given that this is this relationship to all the other points that we're talking about, I would say someone pretty much needs to have give us a timely opportunity to visit and talk with them. And we're just showing some examples here. That could be just us documenting better and finding what's on the property if we don't know what it is, or confirming that it's there and we thought it was there. But again, most importantly, evaluating the management needs and the threats and discussing those with a particular landowner. And I'll just finally draw, like everyone else has, attention to the Heritage Data Explorer. It sounds like Gina's been appointed to be the keeper of and interpreter of the data, but all these things that we've talked about are in the Heritage Data Explorer if you know where to find them. And so we're also available to complement Gina if necessary to help you find what you need. So the sooner someone brings to our attention what you're looking for, we can try to help you out. And so I'll just end right there. And Sue, I have really stayed completely on 10 exact slides.
You're awesome, Rob.
Question, yeah, thank you. There's our staff, Irvin Wilson, who many of you know. You can reach out to him or myself. There's my email and my cell phone. Since we're all working remotely, call anytime. And if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
You did get a couple of questions in the chat. One person said, Becky mentioned the points for wildlife. Do you allow hunting or fishing in natural preserves?
In very rare cases, we only allow hunting when the control of the wildlife population is necessary to protect the heritage resource. And so the most obvious and easy to understand example there is if a deer is eating one of our endangered plants, we're happy for people to try to kill the deer. But it's not hunting for hunting's sake, it's hunting to protect the resources. I can't think of a time when we've allowed quail or turkey hunting, for example, but as long as we can justify it with a heritage protection reason, we'll do that. Becky, did that explain it for you?
Yeah, it wasn't my question, but I think
Oh, I'm
that
sorry.
that clarified it.
Is there another question? I'm sorry.
There is another question. Someone was wondering, within the natural areas category, if a project has federally listed threatened and endangered species, but has not been mapped as a natural heritage site, how do you go about rectifying that disparity?
That would be the site visit. So if a landowner believes they've got a federally listed T&E, there's a decent chance we could already know about it, but it's not impossible that we don't. So we would help document that in the site visit and add it to the database. And then we would probably have other locations of the same endangered species already recorded. So once we get it in, what we would attempt to do, if it's possible in a site visit, is ascertain how large the population is, how significant it is compared to the other populations that we know of in the state. And it sounds like the landowner would be able to share that information with us, but that's how we would proceed. So in this case, it sounds like it wouldn't be an existing site, but if it merited becoming a site and all these other factors we've talked about, we would add it and treat it as if it's been added once we have the full documentation. So that would make them eligible for all the points we've talked about that hinge on the type of resource present once we can document that it's actually there.
Great, thank you. You have one more question so far. Within the natural areas category scoring sheet, under ecological integrity and connectivity, can you please explain biological management intent rankings? Where is this information housed?
That is the only attribute, to my knowledge, that we have not displayed on Natural Heritage Data Explorer. But generally, BMI stands for Biological Management Intent. And that's a review of each landowner or each agency's commitment to biodiversity. So the highest, like a national park or a natural area preserve, that is designed specifically for the perpetuation of biodiversity, probably game lands as well, would have the highest BMI or a score of 1, all the way down to perhaps I don't want to call out a county park, but a park that's primarily managed for recreation and soccer may show up at, as far as we can tell, there's 0 biological management intent on that park, so that would get a score of a 5. So we'd have to look at the managed areas, what we call managed areas, are all the ones that we know about, which is pretty much everything in the state, will be in the Heritage Data Explorer. You'll be able to display those polygons and see if your parcel or project area adjoins those or not. And then once we know what those are, again, you can reach out to us and Gina, and we'll help figure out what the BMI score is on that adjoining conservation land.
Great, thank you.
Great. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Is that everybody? I think so. All the questions?
That's all we got in the chat.
All right. Next up, then, our final presenter is Crystal McKelvey. She's with DCR's Planning and Recreation Resources Division, and she's going to present the Open Space and Parks category. Look at you up and going so quickly.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Can hear you, yeah. Just need to hit slideshow and we are good to go.
All right. too much on the screen and switch settings. Excuse me while I'm doing this.
At least you know how to fix it.
I wish the go-to meeting. Okay, let me switch this again. Okay, sorry everybody. I'm Crystal McKelvey, and I am the Recreation Grants Manager in the Division of Planning and Recreation Resources. And let me switch screens. I'm sorry about this. Options. Sometimes having two screens is useful, and sometimes it's not.
Your go-to meeting
doesn't
like to work with other formats, I don't think, with other tools.
Okay, so I believe, there we go. All right, thank you. Sorry about that delay. Again, Crystal McKelvey, Recreation Grants Manager, and I'm going to be discussing the open space and parks category of the VLCF program. So this is for applications of acquisition or easements on public recreational land or open spaces. I'm just going to step through the different criteria as it's displayed in the scoring criteria. So first of all, this acquires land or provides a conservation easement that will provide increased public access to state waters with recreational potential. So here the scoring is a maximum of 10 points, and it's based on how many different water-based rec opportunities will be available. The next is acquires lands or easements creating new outdoor recreational opportunities for underserved communities or expands existing parks and or public conservation areas with a focus on recreational interests. So this is based on a maximum of 10 points, whether it is a standalone facility or addition to an already existing site. Then we evaluate whether it protects scenic viewsheds or land important to the protection of those scenic resources. And you can see a list here. It includes federally and state listed scenic rivers, scenic roads and byways, and then recreational trails, including blueways or greenways. You can access this data, most of it on the VOP mapper. So you can see the link here for that resource, and you can use it in the VOP, which I'll discuss next. But the maximum score for this category of scenic resources is 10. And it's a matter of adding how many scenic resources are adjacent or in the viewshed of the resource. So then the next step is whether it supports local or regional comprehensive plans. So you do need to cite any local regional plans, and please do provide the page of that and a link to it or a screenshot from it, whatever you're able to provide. So whether it's generally discussed or whether it's specifically discussed does make a difference in the scoring. And then we also evaluate if it addresses a need identified in the Virginia Outdoors Plan, the VOP. Just to go in a little more detail, the Virginia Outdoors Plan right now, the most recent version is 2018. We're already starting to work on the 2023 update because this is produced every 5 years. This is the official outdoor recreation and land conservation plan. It also includes a regional priority area, so you may want to dig down into the pages and appendices about your specific region. This is digital, so please do go to the VOP website on DCR. And as a just summary, we always back up the VOP with actual survey data. So for many years now, natural areas, parks, trails, and access to waterways remain among the top recreational needs in Virginia. Also, there's an increased need for participation in freshwater fishing and also paddle sports. So again, that reiterates the water access value. Furthermore, increased visitation to natural areas are still very important in our survey. So overall, there are many ways to quote the VOP in comparison to what your project is proposing. Depending on how many VOP priority needs will be met, you can get a maximum score of 10 in this category. Then we also look at the availability of land for public use, and this can include hunting, fishing, wildlife watching, and a variety of recreational opportunities. The score here is a maximum of 15 based on how many days in the year the property will be open to the public. Then we go into evaluating whether this provides a resource for an underserved community. Sue touched on this in her introduction about the VIMS Social Vulnerability Index. You can use that resource, or if you have other resources, please do provide those, but send a link or screenshot to justify where those sources were procured. A maximum score of 15 is available on this category. And then we do still look at Conserve Virginia for this category as well. So whether the property is completely or partially within Conserve Virginia is 10 points. And then evaluating the recreational access model scores for both terrestrial and aquatic will help determine an additional 10 points. So that covers most of the scoring criteria for this category. And I did just want to take a quick second to touch on two other programs in DCR. These are the federal recreation grants. The Land and Water Conservation Fund, just to update you on grant rounds because we're frequently asked, we are planning a grant round this year for both acquisition and development projects. This is funding from the National Park Service. It's a 50-50 match. And properties must be for the purpose of public outdoor recreation in perpetuity. So we are pending updates, but hope to continue to move forward with a grant round this year on that. And then for the recreational trails program, this is funding from the Federal Highways Administration at an 80-20 match reimbursement. This is for trail amenity construction projects and can include preliminary engineering costs. We are preparing to open a grant round with a proposed date of April and close date of approximately June 30th. So please be on the lookout for more information related to that. And speaking of which, you can email anytime. We have a delegated email address, recreationgrants@dcrvirginia.gov. And right now, you may have heard about a funding interest form that we put out. This is specifically to use for internal purposes for our federal grant planning. We just want to determine what type of projects are out there in the state that are needing funding, where they're at, and what obstacles they may be facing. We're going through a process of trying to update our grant round procedures. So any information you could provide would be very useful. I know we're all busy, but it will be for internal uses only. And my colleague Kelly Seaton dropped the link for our website if you do want to look at that information more carefully. Thank you for letting me speak this afternoon, and my contact information is here on the page, and I am available for any questions related to open space and parks.
Anyone have any questions for Crystal?
There are none in the chat yet.
Okay. Well, just a little note about open space and parks. This is quite a busy category. It's very competitive. We, in our last grant round, we had 30 applications and 15 of them were in open space and parks. So yeah, you want to make sure you get as many points as you can, and if you have questions, please reach out to us.
We did get one question that just popped up, wondering if the funding interest form was just for federal programs.
Yes, at this time, it's just for the purposes of LWCF and RTP planning. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Wonderful. Of the 15, how many were awarded? Good question.
I think that was 5, Sue, partially.
Yeah, 5
yeah.
were funded partially. Okay, I've got my spreadsheet here.
Total cost, but
Yep.
we spread the money throughout multiple projects.
Yes, we were able to spread the funding down to partially fund 5. We do have a little bit more funding available this grant round, but with it being divided into 5 categories, I think it's just a little bit more than we had last go round. So
can you answer the average grant size for this category over the years for funding?
The award, it really depends on how much funding we have available, because we do try to help out as many projects as we can, but we do get grants from grant requests from $2 million to $28,000. The #1 scoring project in open space and parks that was fully funded, they only requested $28,000. So had they requested $2 million, you know, then we would have had to work out how, with only $800,000 available, try to work that out. So it really depends. Every year is different. Let's see what's next here. If we get this grant, can we go to VOF or other sources to supplement? As far as VOF, I mean, as far as VLCF goes, we do accept other state funding sources as match. I believe that VOF also accepts VLCF as match. And I believe that LWCF, the federal funding source, does as well. There may be some other programs that don't accept, I think the Ag or Farmlands Preservation Trust Fund, I don't think they can accept state funds as match, but we do. Oh, and Larry just messaged me. Thank you, Larry. The funding range this past year for open space and parks was $28,000 to up to $375,000 in grants that were awarded. Let's see. I think that is it. Again, please feel free to reach out to Larry, Gina, and me, and then everyone else, all the agency experts on our interagency task force with any questions. We did just send out a meeting invite on the Vault listserv today. We're going to have a listening session on Wednesday for VLCF. If there's anyone that has comments they want to share with us about the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation, it's going to be a listening session, DCR kind of sponsored and held, just to get your comments and feedback. So please let us know if you've got anything you want to share with us. We're going to post that link for next Wednesday at 3 o'clock on our website too, so you can find it there. Anything else? Great. Well, thank you all very much, and good luck. Let us know if you have questions.